Good evening, and welcome to our house. And yet another of our fabulous game-changing events celebrating the DGA's 75th anniversary. The 75th anniversary theme this entire year is Game Changers. It's about honoring directors whose work forever changed the game in film and television and influenced generations of filmmakers that followed. Steven Spielberg is one of the most influential and beloved filmmakers of all time. Spielberg's body of work, unparalleled blend of heart, hope, and dazzling visual style, are a permanent part of our cultural identity, and their seismic influence on the framework of modern cinema cannot be understated. Tonight, we're going to hear from two astounding filmmakers in their own right, Cameron and Jj Abrams, in discussing Spielberg's effect on their own careers and his immeasurable influence on modern filmmaking. Moderating that discussion is our 75th anniversary chair, Michael Apted, who's done such a fabulous job this year putting these events together. Let's get started, and welcome to the stage, Michael Apted, Jj Abrams, Cameron. They're here to celebrate the incomparable Steven Spielberg.
Thank you, Taylor. It's a pleasure and an honor to introduce tonight's distinguished guests, as it is to be on stage with these two gifted gentlemen. Steven is a superb storyteller who has thrilled and delighted audiences for over 40 years. His films have forged a deep emotional connection with audiences everywhere. So vast and varied is his body of work that it's probably true to say that every person on the planet who has ever set foot in a movie theater carries one or two of Steven's images rattling around in their head. He's directed more than his share of popular and critically acclaimed films. Jaws heralded in the era of the summer blockbuster and was Steven's first DGA nomination. 6 more nominations were to follow for Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Raiders of the Lost Ark, E.T. the Extraterrestrial, Empire of the Sun, Amistad, and Munich. He won the DGA Award for The Color Purple, for Schindler's List, and for Saving Private Ryan, and collected 3 Academy Awards along the way. Then among many other films, there's Jurassic Park, War of the Worlds, Indiana Jones x4, Catch Me If You Can, Minority Report, Artificial Intelligence, and Steven's also got several projects in various stages of production. War Horse and the Adventures of Tintin coming out this Christmas, and Lincoln shooting in the fall. Add in a fraction of the films he's produced: Who Framed Roger Rabbit, The Goonies, An American Tale, Men in Black x3, Gremlins, The 3 Back to the Futures, The Mask of Zorro, Transformers, Shrek, 4x4, Band of Brothers, Pacific, Cowboys and Aliens, and this weekend's Super 8. And you get a sense that somewhere along the line, Steven got the hang of it all. And as one of the founders of DreamWorks, Steven developed an organization that has captured the public's imagination and provided a safe haven for many filmmakers. As a measure of our esteem, the DGA honored Steven in the year 2000 with the DGA Lifetime Achievement Award. So please welcome tonight's guest game changer, Steven Spielberg. So let me just introduce again our distinguished panelists. JJ is a director, writer, and producer who had his first connection with Steven as a teenager when he was hired to organize Steven's home movies. Perhaps as a result of that experience, there's a direct lineage with JJ's new film, Super 8, which was produced by Steven. JJ is the founder of Bad Robot Production and has produced the TV series Felicity, Alias, Lost, and Fringe, and the movies Cloverfield and Morning Glory. Super 8 is his third feature as a director. The first was Mission Impossible 3, followed by Star Trek, both of them wildly popular. And in 2005, JJ was nominated for a DGA award and won the Emmy for directing the pilot of Lost. Director, writer, and producer Jim Cameron currently has the awesome distinction of making the two highest-grossing films of all time, Avatar and Titanic, in case you've forgotten. He won the DGA Award for Outstanding Directorial Achievement in Feature Film and the Academy Award in 1997 for Titanic, and was nominated again 2 years ago for Avatar. His other directing credits include The Terminator, Aliens, The Abyss, True Lies, among others, including numerous documentaries. And famously, he's been at the forefront in developing digital technology. And I'm up here just to keep the peace, okay? So both JJ and Jim have chosen 3 clips, each to illustrate the points they'd like to make about Stephen's career and his influence. And thanks to the two of you for doing that. We're going to show them 2 at a time and in chronological order so we can get some sense of the shape of Stephen's body of work. So we're going to start with a scene from Jaws, and then straight after that, a scene from Close Encounters.
Thank you for being here and letting us do this. This is like such a treat. You know, there are so many scenes I'd pay anything to have been a fly on the wall during shooting, and that's at the top of my list, that scene in Jaws. There's something about that scene that's just so magical, and those characters are just so profound and distinct, and it's such a combination. That scene is just, it's so still, but it's so filled with just incredible emotion and the range of comedy and incredible drama and the picture that's painted. And I've heard stories that Shaw was involved in the writing, and I was just curious what it was like to shoot it. How did you shoot it? I'm so in that boat with them. I can't imagine that you actually shot that scene. It just looks like it actually happened. I just was curious what if you could sort of paint the picture of what it was to do that scene.
Well, the day before we shot this, I wish you had been on the boat with them, not me. This was the second day of shooting. We got nothing the first day. Robert, who is an extraordinary actor, I mean, just extraordinary. But, you know, we all knew he had a little bit of a drinking issue. And he did come to me and ask for my permission to have a few drinks before he shot the scene, because it was described that the boys were imbibing quite liberally, and they were, you know, got to the point where they could giddily compare their battle scars. And I foolishly said, yeah, go ahead and have a couple of drinks. And, you know, as we all know, we're not supposed to do that anywhere. And Robert went off and had some drinks. And then an hour went by, and we had the camera set up, and all of a sudden I saw Robert coming back on the ship, the Orca, from a support boat, and there were 2 crew members. One had him under one arm, the other had him on the other arm. And he was kind of walking, but he wasn't, his feet really weren't touching the ground. And they brought him into the set, and they plopped him down, you know, at that table on the little red leatherette couch, and he sat there, and we tried the first take. We actually rolled on it. We had 2 cameras on Robert. And I've always felt that there's certain details and war stories that we all have about our movies that I shouldn't really deeply go into. But suffice to say that at about half an hour into that, I sent him back home, and where he slept it off and called me the next morning. My phone rang right in the middle of the night. And like the hour of the wolf, and I answered the phone. It was Robert. He was absolutely sober, and he was terrified that something terrible had happened that day, and that he kept saying, did I embarrass you? Please, I hope I didn't embarrass you. He was more concerned about embarrassing me, which I love him for. Wow. I love that that was his reaction, that he was more concerned about me than he was for whatever he perceived himself doing. And I told him, no. I said, whenever you're ready, we'll do it again. So the next day he came prepared, completely sober, having edited, by the way, the scene that John Milius had written 10 pages of a monologue about the Indianapolis that Howard Sackler had conceived, that the uncredited writer on Jaws. He wrote The Great White Hope, which is ironic that he did a picture about the great white shark after that. And Howard came up with the idea, wrote a page, Milius wrote 10, Shaw brought it down to 5 pages, and in very few takes, we nailed it, just nailed it. 2 cameras on every shot, a medium close, sort of a medium to, a little closer to, a little more profile to Robert onto Richard. The isolated single of Roy, And we finished that whole scene in a day. We were done by the end of the day. And it was just an amazing experience for me because, once again, for all of you who have done theater, I haven't, but I'm sure some of you have, it was like that. It was like theater. It was like watching three great performers completely outranking, because all actors outrank directors once they start to speak. Once they start to speak, we are minimalists, and we should remain that way if the speaking is good. We should get out of the way. The worst thing directors do sometimes is to try to get in the way of something that is only going to happen once. And if you stop it, you may never get it back again. And when I saw those guys in that first take start to perform, my job was just to keep quiet and just wait until they finished, and that's what happened.
Yeah, it was amazing. I love that scene. Do you have any questions? You were talking about how it was when you were thinking about it too.
Yeah, I mean, the hardest thing about this gig tonight, which obviously is an honor and a privilege, and we're sort of all acolytes here before the master, but the hardest thing about the gig was how do you pick from such a wealth of truly memorable scenes that we could probably, half of us here could at least recite the words to many of them, and obviously the classics come to mind, like this scene in Jaws, and the other one that has always been a particular favorite for me is the one that ends with Scheider saying, "We're going to need a bigger boat."
Mm-hmm. Well, can I tell this story? I was at Stephen's house about 6 months ago, and we had dinner, and it was very nice, and we were in his office, and you have your scripts, the original
all the scripts, yeah.
And looking at that library of scripts is sort of like looking at just the greatest movies you've ever seen. And you're like, oh, you directed those. And I said, can I look at one of them? And Stephen kindly said yes, and I took down Jaws, and I looked at it. It was the original script from the script supervisor, and there were storyboards and liquid paper and lots of different colored pen, and it was the original script, and even that was cool. But I just opened to one page, the first page I opened to.
That was amazing.
Somewhere in the middle. Now, what I was looking at was some dialogue between Roy Scheider's character and Richard Dreyfuss' character, and there were lines that frankly were sort of a little bit forgettable, and they were crossed out. And in red pen was written, "We need to get a bigger boat." And it was just one of those moments, and it's something I want to talk to you about the Raiders thing too, but the way that you just work and improvise and change things, and that the idea that line, which is maybe the classic line from that movie, that it was just this thing that came to you on the moment, and you realize that those lines that probably would not have been the classic lines were suddenly thrown away. I was just, it was such an amazing window into your process.
Well, thank you. But we all do that. I mean, we all come up with lines. Directors do come up with dialogue from time to time because we have to. Sometimes we frame the context with one line, and that's what happened there because I had been working on the boat for so many months, and we had been pulling this, this huge, 26-foot disaster through the water with two speedboats. And it was a comedy. It really was a comedy. It was like when I saw Fitzcarraldo, I didn't laugh once, not once. My heart went out to him. I was bleeding for him, because we were hauling that shark up that mountain too, and it turned out that it just seemed at the time to be a good idea to have Roy back into the cabin, shot past Shaw, putting the greener gun together, and I just said to Roy, I said, when you get back into it, just say, we're going to need a bigger boat. And I didn't tell Shaw that he was saying that, thinking he would get a great reaction out of Shaw, but Shaw didn't react at all. It was great though. But sometimes these lines just come to you when you're shooting.
You have to see the magic in front of you, or think of it spontaneously in the moment. But you're a very visual director, and your shots are really intricately well constructed and almost little symphonies in and of themselves. So how do you find the balance between the magic of the moment and the architecture that's taken so much planning?
Well, when you're talking to me, you're also talking about yourself, because you are a master at composition and framing and camera movement and telling the story inside of a frame. And that's the whole thing. I mean, we don't write our scripts. I mean, sometimes I've written, most of the time I don't. You've written most of everything you've directed. But my writing is, I do it with the camera. I mean, that's how I make a sort of a rewrite, a contribution to what has been put on paper by really smart, talented people.
But do you rehearse a lot with actors to hear?
I never rehearse at all. No, I'd rather get the take on take 6 and the first 5 takes of rehearsals, because sometimes on the first take, as we all know, magic happens, and you get an incredible moment that you couldn't possibly rehearse and capture that lightning in a bottle and hope to do it a second time. So I don't rehearse at all. I've had actors very frustrated with me because they've come from theater and they need to rehearse, and I've always said, well, that's what we have trailers for. You go to the bathroom and you eat and you nap and you rehearse. And so I invite all my actors to rehearse all they want in trailers or just behind the scenes, but not
Right.
when on the set.
So you don't do anything ahead of time, like at a read-through or something
No,
like that?
no. I've done a couple of read-throughs and I've almost quit the movies. So.
This is great. I can cut a week out of my next pre-production.
But it's not really. It's really the thing that I really enjoy doing more than anything else is trying to figure out what the audience should be looking at. And the reason I don't do a gazillion angles and I don't splice together because a lot of coverage is because I really respect the fact that the audience sometimes in the two-shot gets to ping pong their vision between Robert Shaw and Richard Dreyfuss, and just you get a chance to be your own film editor, and there's something about that, and that's just because I go to so many plays and I have all my life. I just love theater, and because of that, I sit in an audience and I'm a film editor. I'm a drama editor or a comedy editor while I'm sitting watching theater, and I love the discoveries I can make by choosing who to look at. And there was a wonderful experiment years ago for all of you, not quite as old as me, but much older than most people that are appearing to me in this room. And that was the production they had way back in the 70s on Tamara. Do you remember the kind of experimental theater Tamara they had here? And it was incredible to be able to walk through a story on any level, on any floor, through any room, and somehow quickly pick up what the story's about, what the design of the production is, who these characters are, and you become the person that has to put it all together for yourself. And that's why, in a sense, I love wider angles and master shots so the audience gets a chance to. And I think the audience gets more enveloped in a story and more involved if they get to do more cutting than we do in the editing room.
Well, you do these very layered compositions with people, sort of foreground, mid-ground, and then the shots develop and somebody else will move into the foreground and the shot develops nicely as the scene progresses to hit all the story beats. And it must be hard to see those shots cut up, I'm sure.
Yeah, and sometimes you have to cut them up for pacing. If your film's too long, you got to go in and you got to break up the master in order to cut out 6 lines to be able to bring the running time of the scene, or maybe the tempo of the scene is just not working. You got to bring it down. So you got to have coverage to protect yourself. But I like master.
Have there ever, first of all, I feel like sitting between you two, I feel like the clerical error. Can I ask you, have you ever had a situation where, because both of you do this, but I think, particularly you, Stephen, where you do one shot that most directors would take 5 shots to tell that story. Have you ever had a situation where you felt like, oh, I wish I had more coverage for that? Or, because you seem to do that just like no one else, really. And I just didn't know if there were ever any situations where you thought, oh, if I'd only had this or that, I would have been able to cut out of this earlier.
Oh, all the time. I mean, all the time. If I don't cover myself, there's invariably I'm going to look at that shot and say, if I only had one cutaway, and sometimes I'll go out, to an insert stage and shoot an insert as somebody picking up a pencil, just so I can get out of the scene, or cut out a minute and a half of the scene. But I often paint myself into a corner. But I think the whole thing about creating a master shot is not something that anybody, not something that I invented. I just love the old movies and look at how many movies were made, 5, 6 decades of films where entire scenes were done in profile. Yep. This whole thing about over-shoulder shots, which television has made famous. Remember in the old movies, with 1:3:3 aspect ratio, you could actually have the characters on this screen close to the audience, but still see them from head to toe because of the aspect ratio. And the fact that people would be talking, Oscars were given to actors talking to each other in profile. The great scene in It's a Wonderful Life where Jimmy Stewart is trying to get everybody not to get all their money from the savings and loan, but just enough to tide them over before 3 o'clock, before the doors close. And that entire scene is in one shot, and it's Jimmy Stewart is 3/4 back, the camera's behind Stewart, and he's out of focus. And the whole scene is about him talking, but there's no cutaways to him. You watch the panic on these people who are slowly starting to trust him and bringing down their wish list of how much money they would like to take out so it doesn't ruin him and his family. It's a great moment, and Capra didn't do this, this, and this. And I watch a lot of those movies, and I watch them, and I say, I wonder how that works. Why does that work? How possibly could that work without the great Jimmy Stewart having a close-up. But it works.
And editors wouldn't have the courage to stay on that shot these days. It was interesting when you came into the performance capture stage, and the first time you took the virtual camera, it was so amazing to watch you and Peter Jackson, and Peter immediately did a shot that was typical of him, and you immediately did a shot using the same performances that was so signature, so in your DNA, that it was absolutely recognizable. If somebody had asked me who did that shot, I would have known it was you. And I've thought later how to quantify that, and it's just the way the shot flows and develops and follows the kind of the heart of the scene. It was really amazing to watch, and it really made me realize that directors are kind of hardwired to see the world a certain way. And it was just so beautiful to watch you working with this completely new tool, but yet instinctively just going to the things that made visual sense to you.
And the first time I did it was with you when you invited me to learn how to do it on Avatar. And I came over to your set when you were shooting Avatar.
Pre-Tintin.
And I had never had one of those things in my hand. I mean, Bob Zemeckis had actually given me, what Bob used was he used a Sony camcorder that he used for his viewfinder, and he was able to move around in a very small volume. But I never before held this instrument device that Jim created, which was like a really great PS9, joystick. It was an incredible device where you could actually crane and you could dolly and you could do it quickly or slowly. And as you walk, you in 3 dimensions, the virtual set moves around with you. It was a pretty extraordinary experience for me because I realized that was a true art form where you've got much more connection with your art as opposed to working through 100 people or 150 people. I had a real selfish feeling that, wow, I could get really used to this.
Yeah, and you did. But I think it's such a look, we all know what a spectacular filmmaker you are. But I had so much respect for you in that moment because here you were in a new medium with a new tool, and that you were not familiar with, and you immediately just started playing with it. There was no self-consciousness, there was no sense of sort of standing back or wanting to sort of study it maybe in private someplace, which I think most directors, probably myself included, would not want to. It was just jump in the pool and start playing with it and be open and in a way, if I can use the word, childlike. And I think that's your enthusiasm and your passion for movies has been about being that sort of child before the universe in a way, and all the possibilities of it, and you're still such a movie fan now,
It's just so much fun. I mean, and you also were very generous to have a public pool. You didn't keep visitors away. You encouraged filmmakers to come in and look at this new technology, this new medium, actually.
Yeah, but I had a very, very famous Academy Award-winning director come in, and I was trying to explain to him, okay, now you're uncoupling the photography part of it from the performance part of it. And he said, why the fuck would you want to do that?
It is true. It's a very interesting thing because you do it in two iterations. The first iteration is just like directing theater. It's just like theater. There's no camera. You're not camera conscious. You're not even considering a camera. You're only considering blocking and eye contact, or at least point of view, and you're right there with your actors. You're right next to them, and you're directing them. And actors are kind of stunned because the director is actually right there in your face and not in Video Village. It's sort of an amazing, intimate, very familial experience. And then, once you are able to record the actors and get exactly what you want out of them, like a little one-act play, then you go into another volume and you take the camera, the actors have gone home, and those performances, 9, 10 takes you've done, you can just pick any of those 10 takes and just take a camera and keep repeating that take and try different things with the camera and try different staging.
Did you find yourself using that technology in a traditional way, or did you find more than you did?
Yeah, I went back to more of the traditional way. And what I eventually did when I made my own movie, when I finished learning from first Bob Z and then Jim, and I did Tintin, I began to miss having the camera in my hand. And even though I was right with the actors in the volume, I had the little controller with me all the time so I could, and I was doing 70, 80 shots a day because there's no lighting. All you do is get an angle and find, maybe it'll come around the actor and find somebody else to go into, and then quickly pull back, go up, go to anything you want to do. And I found myself covering it as we actually made the takes. And it was a little bit of the old school, a little bit of the new school.
Well, let's go back to Close Encounters.
Yeah.
Why you chose that particular bit.
Well, I was saying it, it was so hard to pick clips, and so I thought, all right, I'm going to pick some clips that actually just affected me. And it doesn't matter, I can be watching, Close Encounters on cable at 3 o'clock in the morning, and when that scene comes on, where the mothership comes over, and just the sense of awe and wonder that it invokes, I still get, a lump in my throat and a tear in my eye a little bit, and right through the end of the film, right till the thing's taking off, and just the beatific expressions on the faces of all the cast, and it always takes me back to that moment in the mid-70s, right? It was 77.
76 I made it.
Yeah, 76. Yeah, it reminded me of the impact that your work had on me at that point. I loved Jaws, but I sort of loved it as a fan because I didn't think of it more as a potential filmmaker. But I had this little group of friends in college that were making Super 8 films. Hadn't even moved up to 16 millimeter yet, and and we all thought we were film critics, of course. And we'd go out to see whatever the hot new movies were, Close Encounters was so impressive to me because I had loved 2001: A Space Odyssey, and there really hadn't been anything that really had just that incredible, awe-inspiring sort of, the invoking of the numinous, that thing in the universe that's so big you can barely contain it, but somehow you manage to put it on the screen, but do it in a very humanistic way that 2001: A Space Odyssey didn't. I sort of realized that the doorway into science fiction for the average person is through family bonds, parent and child, and bonds of friendship and so on. And if you didn't have that human part of the story, the wondrous part of it wouldn't work. So that was an important concept that got embedded at that point, and I've always tried to carry that out. No matter how spectacular the images are, you always have to ground it in some way.
That's right. You have to have characters on a journey that you want to be with. You want to take it with them, and you want to understand, what they're putting everybody through. Close Encounters was an example of that because I wrote the script and I didn't even think twice that this man was leaving 2 children and a wife to climb aboard that mothership and go flying off into the unknown. I was
You didn't have kids.
I was a kid. I wasn't married. I didn't have kids. So for me, leave the family. Get on that thing. You'll have fun, and maybe you'll come back young like those other people that came off the mothership. Or, the whole. And I really didn't even blink until I had kids in 1985. Until my first child was born in '85, and I showed the film to my kids much later than that. I think I had a good screening for them in the '90s. And I remember watching my own movie with them and feeling, oh my God, I felt so guilty. What are they thinking of me? Am I going to walk out on them? I mean, is Dad next? Because this is what he believes in. But it's just childhood, and I stayed young for very many years in terms of my own, being able to just sort of, lead with my insides a bit more and not so much, use my head. And I really believe that Close Encounters was probably the closest I've ever coming to achieving a dream on film. I don't think I've ever made a movie before or after that has come as close to what I wanted that film to be as Close Encounters did.
But you made the first version of it in high school, I think, right?
Firelight, right? Exactly.
Firelight,
That was the first version of it when I was in high school. And that was also, it was longer than Close Encounters. That movie was like 2.5 hours, in 8 millimeter before Super 8 was invented. I mean, JJ got that other 0.5 millimeter well. You were lucky. But it was, I was really always completely intoxicated and infatuated with the sky at night. There was nothing more exciting than the sky at night. And I used to go out. When I got my driver's license, I'd drive out to Sky Harbor Airport in Phoenix, Arizona, and I would just sit at the other end of the runway watching the airplanes land. Because at night, you couldn't hear them when they were far away, but it looked like UFOs coming in, these big anti-collision lights, coming down, landing lights coming in for a landing. And I would just sit there, and you always read UFO reports. You don't ever hear the machines. They're silent. And I would watch the planes land at Sky Harbor, and I had been interested in UFOs ever since the first reports came on television in the newspapers.
When you were doing that scene, I'm just curious what you were telling the people, the actors in the scene, what they were seeing. Like, how did you communicate that to them?
Not very well. Because if you really look carefully, and if you see it on Blu-ray, you'll see that luckily the ship's big enough that there's one eye line out that way and one eye line out that way, and there's somebody looking a little lower than the ship actually is, and someone who's looking where there's no ship at all, and they're all back there. So we tried our best, but it's hard with 800 extras to get all the eye lines lined up. And it's tough, but the thing that I would tell the actors basically was, and I don't want to ruin any of this for you, but this event about ruining illusion, and I had a bullhorn and I put many numbers, big posters of 1, 2, 3, just cards with numbers on them, up to maybe 60 cards, and I would just line this huge dirigible hangar in Mobile, Alabama, where we shot Close Encounters. And when the littler ships were coming in, everybody had to get their eye lines right. And what I told the actors was 7, 8, 9, 9, no, 9, now 10. And that's how I directed most of those scenes. That's all people heard was me counting numbers.
Well, you should remake the film now that we have laser pointers.
We have laser pointers now, exactly.
When you were writing the film, did you know how you were going to execute it?
I started Close Encounters by writing the last scene. I wrote what you just saw a little bit of. I wrote that first. I wrote the entire thing first. And I got myself to a point where I had basically written a chocolate factory, for a chocoholic like me. And I had put everything into that scene I had ever dreamed about or ever wanted to make a movie about, which was man's first intelligent, peaceful encounter with beings from beyond the imagination, just outside of our solar system even. And that's all I had wanted to do for many years. And so I wrote that scene first. Then I reverse engineered and backed up, okay, now who gets to see it? Does the military get to see it? This is going to be about military, men and women watching this great, is it going to be the government? Will it be a story about the government? Because Paul Schrader had written an earlier draft that I didn't use, but there was some suggestion of, in his script, a person giving up their entire life to be able to sacrifice themselves to go on this amazing journey, which was a nice contribution Paul made. And so I just went back and I said, well, the only thing I really can relate to are members of my own family and friends in my own neighborhood. And I went back and I basically said, okay, now I need, a family, an American family, to experience something out of the ordinary. And that's where I went back to page 1. And then it took 8 months to write it because I realized that you can't really, it's very hard to reverse engineer a movie and start it with a third act.
But did you understand the technology?
I did, yeah. I mean, the technology of how we were going to.
Yeah.
I thought I did. We actually did something which is so far ahead of its time. There was an individual named Colin Cantwell who has a huge screen credit on 2001: A Space Odyssey, along with Wally Weavers and Doug Trumbull. Colin Cantwell is a contributor to 2001. And I met Colin, and I told Colin my story outline, what I wanted to do. And I put, before the script was ever written, Colin went to work, actually, and it was his idea to do it this way, creating the first UFO, the first digital UFO. And it was the first time a computer was ever used to create a character. Mm-hmm. And it took him months of render time to get this little test out to me. And there was a little football stadium he used, all rendered, and lights on the stadium, and this one little mothership, tiny little ship with a few lights that lands. And it looked like what today would be not even acceptable on Nickelodeon on Saturday morning. It would just not be acceptable. They wouldn't put it on because their animation is so layered and detailed. But I knew that it was not real and it was too cartoony, but I saw at that moment that there was a world out there waiting to explode for all of us in this room. So I went back to, just finding the next best person I could possibly meet on Close Encounters from 2001: A Space Odyssey, and that was Doug Trumbull. And I went with Doug, and I basically, threw myself, on the mercy of his court, and said, "You need to help me figure this out." And Doug came aboard very early.
But one of the amazing things when I was a teenager, and your office called after we were at a film festival and asked if we would be interested in repairing movies that you'd made when you were a teenager, and we got Firelight and Escape to Nowhere. And one of the incredible things, especially in 1982, to see early works of any director, let alone your work, it was an amazing thing to see that your process was a process, that you had come from somewhere, that it didn't happen magically. It happened because of a lot of hard work and, of course, unbelievable, natural, brilliance. But I remember you telling me that when you finished Close Encounters, there were like 9 other scenes that you knew had to be in the movie that
Had to be.
been there. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, the thing of it was, I had written the script, and I had written it in piecemeal fashion. I was all over the place, and I finally got a continuity pulled together. And Columbia needed the movie. They were having real financial problems, and they needed a Christmas movie. And they kind of said, "Go now, just make the movie right now," which I did. I'm not going to say that I had a script I was confident in, but I was confident enough in the structural narrative. I was confident enough in the DNA of the concept to jump into this thing sort of, half-cocked. But I went into shooting it, and then when I looked at the movie on a screen for the first time with Mike Kahn, my editor, I just felt that I should have spent 6 more months writing on it. And I suddenly realized how to tell the story better, but by then, it was too late. And we were very, very close to finishing the film. And, everything was, Doug Trumbull was knocking these effects out, and there were CBBs. I discovered what that meant, could be betters, shots. And I think Doug invented the word CBB. And before I knew it, the film was out, and even though the film was well received and the film made a lot of money for the studio, for Columbia Pictures, I was never happy with it because I finally realized that I had a better script in my head, but not on the stage. And so when the film was successful enough, I went back to Columbia, and I said, "Can I go off and shoot, these extra scenes that will be the movie that I've wanted to make my entire life? Please let me do it." And I don't think I sold my soul, but I did sell a little bit of it because they said, "We will give you the money to go out and shoot these extra scenes, and we'll reissue the movie, but you need to show us what's inside the mothership." And it's something I didn't want to do, and so I always prefer the other version that has all my extra scenes, but not that ending. But I did. That's how I got the money.
I thought there were scenes like with the globe and stuff
Yes,
that
that
you
was
hadn't. Was that part of the? Wasn't that was in the original movie? But wasn't
No, that was part of the original release.
right? I thought that was one of the scenes that you went and did after you'd gotten your first cut.
Yes, that was after I got the first cut. There's other scenes too that I did much later. But after I got the first cut, I got a little more money out of Columbia at that point, and there were 3 scenes I needed to shoot, and one was how they find the coordinates, how did they get the longitude and latitude to figure out that it's Devil's Tower, Wyoming, is the nodal point of this encounter. And so I was able to go out and shoot that scene. Yeah, and Bill Fraker did all of the extra photography of all those extra weeks.
You screwed up. Sorry, I just want one comment. You screwed up an entire generation of filmmakers by creating this idea of the director's cut re-release, which then was, the Laserdisc director's cut, and
right.
the DVD director's cut. Because now we're able to compromise with ourselves while we're making the movie and say, well, I can always put it in the director's.
And you can, yes. And sometimes more people see the film on disc than they do, in the theaters. Except for your films, Jim. They all see your films in theaters, obviously.
All right, well, let's start with Raiders.
Well, one of the reasons I chose that scene from Raiders was just classic Saturday morning serial sequence. It was like the greatest, and you had so many balls in the air, and there were just so many things to be tracking at one time, and then I was horrified and annoyed beyond belief to learn that you just basically made that up the day before you shot it, which I can't understand. I was just curious if you could just talk about that sequence, what it was like filming that, because it was an amazing and fun.
Well, thanks.
Totally.
For one thing, you have to understand, looking at the footage, hard to tell. It was like 120 degrees out there, and we shot that in Tunisia, in Nefta, out in the desert out there. It was really, the conditions were terrible. And I had been already about 4 weeks in Tunisia making the desert parts of Raiders, and everybody wanted to go home, and everybody was sick. I mean, most people were really, really ill. They were getting touristas all the time. It just kept. Dougie Slocum, the DP, and I never got sick because we got Sainsbury canned food from the UK and brought it all in, and we only ate out of cans for 5 weeks, and everybody else got sick, but we didn't. So that was a little lesson to be learned. But what happened was, on this sequence, the scene was kind of very sketchily written in the script. There was going to be a fight, and the fight was going to result in the flying wing blowing up. It was going to be a relatively short fight, and Indy would get out there and fight this big mechanic, and then he would somehow cause, with the gasoline thing, the gasoline would come out of the truck and it would catch on fire and the whole thing would blow up. And that was pretty much it. And so this was like when I was making 8mm movies, and this is something that I think, JJ, you certainly know, all of us know what this is like. When you're really just making it up as you go along, when you literally, you have a camera in your hand. In this case, we had an Aeroflex, and with a 200-foot mag, so it was very, very easy to, carry or to stick on sticks and, or a monopod. And we ran around with this little camera with short loads and just made everything up. Glenn Randall, the stunt coordinator, and Harrison and Pat Roach, a professional wrestler who's done many movies. I found him when I saw Barry Lyndon. He was so good in that fight with Ryan O'Neal and Barry Lyndon. I said, get me that guy to play this guy. And that was the beginning of our relationship on these indie movies with Pat. And literally made the whole thing up shot for shot. Didn't know where it was going, didn't know how many punches were going to be thrown, didn't know he was going to get killed by the propeller on the airplane, didn't know that. All of it literally came together, and it took about 2.5, 3 days to shoot the scene. But it was so much fun. It was the most fun I had, which I'm glad you picked this clip, because it was literally on the whole movie of Raiders, this was the biggest blast that all of us got, because we didn't know where it was going. We all literally made it up as we just went along.
And I'm just curious, like how flexible were, like Harrison was, in terms of how much of the work was his. I mean, he seemed to be doing almost all of that. Was any?
Yeah, well, Harrison was the guy that said, he would go over to me and he would say, "Come on, Steve, let me bite the guy. Let me just bite him. Let me just bite him." He says all these movies have these spectacular punches, and it rattles the guy's, it just shakes his rafters, and he falls over, but. I'm Indiana Jones. I'm like a regular person. I want to bite him. And so I let Harrison at one point bite him. And then Harrison came over to me after he got to bite him, and Harrison came over to me and said, "Hey, Steve, can I throw sand in his face?" He said, "Is there any place in the scene where I can just take a handful of sand and blind him with the sand?" I said, "That's really dirty fighting." He said, I'm trying to get the Ark to Cairo. Come on. Come on. So it was a collaboration. It was a real collaboration, this sequence.
I don't know if it's as annoying to everyone else here as it is to me to find out that this sequence wasn't as meticulously storyboarded as like the shower scene in Psycho.
Right? No, not one.
And when they first come out of they're in the crypt. They come out. There's a guy who's lying there. You have to tell that story because I've never even noticed it until you brought it up.
Yeah.
When we watched the movie. You mind just telling what that is?
Well, there's a scene where Indy and Marion,
at
the very beginning, they come out of the crypt where all the skeletons were, the mummified remains, and they come out and they push, they push this sort of big stone, and they climb out that way, and they get down to where the airplane is. He makes the plan that he's going to get the Ark somehow on the plane. Okay, so that's all in the works. But I had this other really cool scene that I really was desperate to shoot. And I thought it was going to be a really great gag. And the gag was, while Indy's in with the skeletons and he just gets out, you cut to the outside, and there's this really bookish archaeologist. And he's making his own discoveries, found a way into that part of the Well of the Souls. And he's got glasses, and he's got books, and he's got a little what do you call that thing? The little thing they dig with, and a little brush. And he's carefully digging, and he's finding the corners of this big stone. And just as he gets these corners uncovered, all by itself, the stone starts moving, and he steps back, and the stone starts moving toward him. And he steps back further, and the stone goes all the way out by itself and falls, and Indy sticks his head out right in this guy's face. And the guy looks at Indy, and he faints, dead away, just faints. And I shot it.
But you see the guy there. Like, I never noticed him.
It's because I cut it out. But before digital, we couldn't, remove people, which we could have done easily today. So he remains a big continuity error.
There's that great beat where, if I could just bring this up too, where the Nazi guy, he takes that what looks like nunchucks or something, and it's just he thinks he's going to torture Karen Allen's character Marion, and he puts it together and he makes a hanger for his jacket. And the guy, it's fantastic. But you said you'd actually tried that gag.
I tried that gag on 1941. And I tried the gag I had when Slim Pickens is sitting on the toilet. I had a Japanese soldier come out, and I'm not a Japanese soldier. I had Christopher Lee come out with the same thing. He has the nunchucks that has the hook on the end, and we immediately think it's going to be a torture device to torture information out of Slim Pickens. And instead, he folds it up into a triangle, and they hang his coat on it. And I previewed 1941, which was one of the most interesting previews I've ever had. And for a comedy or something that was supposed to be a pseudo-comedy, it probably got 1 or 2 laughs at the beginning when the girl in the submarine, the naked girl, the jaws take off. That got a great reaction, and then people just decided to stop laughing for the next 2 hours. So this got no reaction. When he made the triangle, it got no reaction at all, nothing. But I loved the gag. And so I didn't want to let it go. So when we were shooting the scene with Tote and Dietrich in the tent, I had the same nunchucks. By the way, it's the same prop from 1941. We didn't make a new one. I wanted that same prop. I love it. And I did the whole joke again, but this time because the audience was so caring about the characters and invested in Marion and the outcome with this sort of pseudo-bad good guy played by Paul Friedman. Now, when we previewed Raiders, and they hang the coat, Tote's coat up on the hanger, the audience screamed and applauded, which never happened once in 1941. Not once. And that was the movie I made just before Raiders. So,
Well, it's just heartening to know that when a gag or a moment or a line or a beat doesn't work in something else.
You got to pay it forward.
Yeah.
So tell us about why you chose the E.T. scene.
Well, the E.T. scene, it's one of my favorite scenes in movies. And you got these unbelievable performances out of kids. And I was just curious to hear you talk a little bit about what it was like to direct those kids. Mm-hmm. And you had, great. Special effects on the set, and it was obviously an incredibly critical scene. And I mean, they were all, again, it was funny, it was magical, they're so full of wonder. You believe every moment. It's real sibling relationships, but you also had this Carlo Rambaldi design thing, and it must have been a very difficult process. I'm just curious what that was like.
Well, I think adult actors, use a lot of technique and all sorts of metaphorical recall to be able to find a touchstone for them to evoke the necessary emotion if they are not getting it in the environment, and that takes training and it takes experience, and kids are so close to the truth you can't fool a kid. And I really believe that if those kids, even the boy who played Michael, who was the older boy, if they didn't believe in some very private, mystical place in their hearts that E.T. wasn't real, I never could have gotten those performances from those kids. But they sincerely believed that E.T. was a living, breathing entity. And even with 15 operators pulling cables and levers to get the face to move and the brow and the mouth to articulate, even with that, even though I always hid the puppeteers so the kids couldn't see them, I mean, they knew what E.T. was, but they believed he was real. And everything around E.T. that happened, especially Drew Barrymore's improvisations, which were amazing, came because there was a belief system that happened on day one.
Were there any improvisations you remember in particular that?
Yeah, I think, and Melissa Matheson will correct me because she wrote the line, I apologize, but I believe it was Drew's line when she looked down under the table and said about E.T., I don't like his feet. I think that was Drew. But there were all sorts of different contributions the kids made. But Melissa Matheson had written an amazing screenplay. I wrote the story and the structure, but she wrote every single line of dialogue on that script, and she had such a connection to her own childhood and to the way kids talk. And they don't talk much differently in 1982 than they talk today. And I was, I had the privilege of watching you direct Super 8, and I kind of saw I had so many flashbacks of my own experience on AT, watching you uncensored, talking to these kids like they were your age and not talking down to them once, not talking down to any of the kids. And I think what you did with Super 8 to pull those authentic performances from those kids is kind of the trick. Kids can't look at you like you're a teacher or like you're a principal. Kids have to look at you like you're with them in communion on every subject, from every subject. Kids have to really respect the fact that you're a kid yourself in order for the kids to really be able to trust you enough to give you what they are when the cameras aren't around.
Well, you also give me great advice, which is that, if you need to, you can give them a line reading, which I would never, of course, do with an adult actor. But when you said that, I was like, really? You should. And there were times when I would try to explain it. But, you know, this scene was, there's something about that scene that is just so transportive, and you had much younger actors. I mean, you know, and I know that Drew obviously was incredibly.
Yeah, Drew was a genius, and so was Henry. I mean, Henry Thomas. You know, Jack Fisk, the art director, had made a movie, and I was at the end of my rope. I was, a month, maybe 5 weeks away from shooting E.T., and I did not have Elliot. Did not have Elliot yet. And Jack knew that we were struggling. And this is what the great thing about this. He had just directed Sissy, his wife, in a movie. And this is the great thing about all of us in this room, that there is more than just a connection that we have in wanting to help each other and wanting to share share all of our secrets and share all of the people we're finding. And Jack just had heard through third parties that we were struggling and said, I have a boy, he's only got 6 lines in my movie, I'm sending over the reel. He sent me over the whole reel, 10 minutes on film. I put it on the chem, and I got to see Henry Thomas for the first time. And I thought he was really good, but I wasn't 100% sure if he was ready for my movie because he only had a very small part in Jack's. So I brought him in, and Mike Fenton, the casting director, I set up an improv. The improv, if you've seen the DVD of E.T., the improv is actually on the special, features section. And his improv made us all cry. We were all crying in the room. And you can actually hear me saying to Henry, after the improv, kid, you've got the part. So he walked out of that room playing Elliot. But that's the wonderful thing about it. Same thing happened with Hal Ashby. Hal somehow heard I couldn't find the girl in Close Encounters. And now, this isn't like 5 weeks away from shooting. I'm leaving on Monday. I'm leaving on Monday. This is Friday when Hal Ashby sends me 2 reels of Bound for Glory to show me Melinda Dillon. And I cast Melinda Dillon on that Friday because Hal Ashby was such a mensch to hear I was in trouble, send this thing over. Melinda was working Monday. That's how fast it was.
Wow. Is it true that you dressed up in a bear suit to get a reaction from Cary Guffey on Close Encounters?
Yeah, it was a gorilla suit, actually.
Gorilla suit, yeah. Worked pretty well.
There were 2 things,
there
right?
There were two things. Actually, I wasn't the gorilla on this. I was the person who thought that would be a good idea. But I had a clown and a gorilla. And the makeup man, I think, was the clown. Somebody else was the gorilla. But I basically had a big piece of poster board in front of either of them. So when he walked into the room, I had the clown revealed, really funny clown, a scary clown. And Cary Guffey, at 3 years old, began to really laugh. And he didn't laugh, he began to marvel at it. He just looked at it and he cocked his head. And he was like mesmerized, by this beautiful image of this very sweet face. And then I dropped the poster board, and there was a gorilla to the left. And he looked at the gorilla, and what you see on film is his reaction. He was like 5 seconds away from shrieking until I had the guy in the gorilla suit take the head off, and he could see it was, I think it was the makeup man. I think it was the makeup man was the gorilla. And then when he saw his makeup man, he started to smile again. And sometimes with a 3-year-old, that's what you got to do. You can't.
Stephen, when you were doing E.T., at what point did you realize you were onto something?
The first day of shooting, I knew we had something special. I didn't know if anybody would see the movie because it was a kid's film. Nobody was seeing kid films in 1981, 82. I mean, you couldn't make a kid film that would make any money. Disney was failing miserably at that point with all their stuff. And so it was a real danger, and that's why Columbia turned it down, read Melissa's screenplay and put it in turnaround. And Universal, Sid Sheinberg, that loved the script, still wanted the insurance policy. We went out and had to make a negative pickup deal where they guaranteed it, but we had a negative pickup company on the set every day. And if I went $1 over, I'd have to give up, some of my points. I didn't want to do that. So we were on schedule and on budget on that one. But it made people nervous. A kid movie made people nervous. And I knew after the first day that I'd be proud of this picture for the rest of my life, but I didn't know if anybody would ever go to see it.
And when did you realize that people would see it? Was there a moment when you were previewing it or something?
Yeah, the preview in Texas was insane. It was the greatest preview I've ever had, before or after, the E.T. preview. And it was interesting, too, because Henry Thomas, I invited him to come to the preview to see the movie for the first time with his mom. And the preview was, it was just, you had to be there, but it was insane. And And when everybody left the theater, nobody wanted to leave. The audience wanted to stay there and see it over again, and they were demanding that we show the movie again. And they actually were saying, with the feet and everything, and ushers had to nicely get people out of the theater. They wanted to play the movie a second time. That's never happened to me before. But when they all left the theater, I walked over to Henry, and he was crying. And I thought, oh, this is amazing. It's really touched him. And I walked over and I said, Henry, what made you cry? He said, you did. And I said, I did? How did I make you cry? I was sitting 3 rows behind him. And he said, you didn't take your voice out. And he had listened to me directing him. He watched the movie and heard my voice giving him direction for the entire 2 hours of the film. And it totally spoiled the picture for him, which was a little bit scary for me. I didn't realize that.
Kind of a buzzkill.
Yeah, and that's but we do when you're working. It is a buzzkill, big buzzkill. But when you're working with kids, you talk to the kids while the cameras are rolling. You throw ideas at them, and you talk to them. I watched JJ do this, when he was doing Super 8. He'd finish a take and he'd say, keep it rolling, and he'd just start talking to the kids. Say it this way, do this. Oh, if you say this to Alice and Alice says this to Charlie, oh, do it that way. Cameras are still turning. JJ even comes into the picture where you can see him on film talking to them, huddling with them like a scrimmage, and then he leaves the frame and they do it another way. And I think, in a sense, in working with kids, what JJ is so facile with, kids start to hear your voice in their dreams.
Have you?
Nodding your head.
Have you worked with kids? Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah?
Yeah, sure.
Sure.
Yeah, here and there. It's scary, Eddie Furlong on Terminator.
Yeah, of course.
We we're making at the time we thought $85 million movie. It turned out to be $100 million, but it was going to sink or swim on that casting. And Eddie'd never been in front of a camera before.
Ever.
He was the right kid.
Exactly, he was the right kid. He was incredible.
I think having kids helps you work with kids.
It does. I didn't have kids before I made E.T., but I wanted to have kids because of E.T.
Yeah.
I wanted to take all those kids home with me.
Now you have like 25, right?
Right.
You have quite a
I've got
tribe.
about 7 good ones. 7 out of 7, that's pretty good.
Can we just do the Schindlers
Sure,
first?
of course.
Just because it's kind of fresh. It's obviously it's such an incredibly powerful film, and I know it was a very personal film for you that you had thought about making for a long time. I think 10 years or something like that. And the motif of the girl in the red coat is just so incredible, so moving, and so obvious. It's like so damn obvious, but none of us ever did it. And it's only in retrospect things that sort of blindingly brilliant are only so simple and obvious in retrospect. So was she always the girl in the red coat in the script, or is that something that evolved during pre-production?
She was always the girl in the red coat. Schindler, in the Thomas Kinley book, Schindler talks about noticing a girl who, during the purge of the Jewish town ghetto in Krakow, was unmolested and left alone. And somehow her coat called so much attention to herself, and yet everyone else, other children her age, were being rounded up, some killed, some rounded up and put on the transports, and yet she was, she escaped, didn't escape the Holocaust, but she escaped that moment. And I always thought, for me anyway, because I had read so much about it, that was a metaphor for so many countries knew that the Holocaust was occurring, but weren't doing anything about it. This country knew, Great Britain knew, Russia knew that this was happening, and yet rather than basically send a sortie over the death camps to bomb the Ostbahn railway systems, to just cripple production, even bomb the crematoria, to slow down this industrialized mass murder that was taking place and had been taking place for over 4 years. We did nothing about it, and in a sense, it was so obvious what was happening, and yet we didn't act. And in a sense, the girl in the red coat represented that context for me.
it's such a, but so powerful visually. I mean, the way it's a motif that's woven through, and then of course culminating where you see the red coat in the pile of.
Yes, exactly.
Is it pile of clothing or pile of bodies?
It was a pile of bodies, yeah.
Pile of bodies, yeah. Yeah.
And the film was always black and white in your mind.
Yeah, it was always black and white. The studio begged me to shoot it in color, release it in black and white, but have a color negative for VHS beta tapes later on. And I just wouldn't do it. I kept saying, this has got to be in black and white. And it was almost like John Ford used to not cover because he was afraid the studios would, take this film away and recut them. So Ford didn't do coverage to protect himself. I shot it in black and white to protect myself.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
But I got to say that Sid Sheinberg was the person who was the head of the studio. It wasn't his idea, by the way, to encourage me to shoot it in color. It was somebody else at the studio. But Sid was the one that found the book for me and told me that this belongs to you. This is something, a story you have to tell. And it took me 10 years to gather the courage to tell it.
Mm-hmm. Did you feel that even with your track record, when the book first came into your hands, that it was going to be a hard film to get financed, or was it more that you just felt as an artist that you weren't ready to tell the story?
Yeah, well, the film came from the head of the studio, so it was already financed. He was going to put up the money at Universal for the film, but I just didn't feel that I never said to myself, you don't have the maturity to take on, to acquit one story of many millions of stories of the Holocaust. But I just felt that my body of work up to that point indicated that I didn't have the physiology to take on the subject. I was afraid that if I did anything to sanitize it, to sweeten it, to put it in any other context other than semi-documentary, which I had never done before stylistically in a film, that I was going to bring shame, and I was going to bring misunderstanding and create even more opportunity for denial from all the deniers that were in the world denying that 6 million had been murdered. So I was terrified of for all the right reasons. And for me, Color Purple was a conscious stepping stone, as was Empire in the Sun. Because remember, I had already been developing something on Schindler's List before Empire of the Sun, before The Color Purple. Those films for me were films I wanted to make. So I wanted to make them for their own reasons. I loved those stories, and I loved the books those stories were based on. But I knew consciously that if I could do a good enough job on, especially Empire of the Sun, that may embolden me to take on Schindler's List.
Did you find yourself sort of editing or holding back your natural instinct to do, say, long tracking shots or developing masters and that sort of thing because that it might somehow commercialize or cheapen the subject, or did you just naturally gravitate to the more kind of longer lens, sort of less showy, let's say?
It was. I basically took all of those really great colors that I've loved working with and put them away, and just said, there'll be moving shots, of course, but there'll be nothing to call attention to itself. There'll be no crane work. There will be no sweeping shots of the crane going down low to the street or up over a wall or into the Poshoff work camp. It won't look like Stalag 17. I'm not going to let it look like Stalag 17. And so the whole purpose was to make it look as close to a documentary as I could.
It seemed like you did. Oh, I'm sorry, JJ. Go ahead. No, go ahead. It seemed like you did that in Munich as well. I guess the go-ahead part didn't. I didn't even hear it when I said it.
That was so classic you.
No, go ahead.
I forgot what I was going to say.
What do you want out of 3 directors?
Let me help this along, Jim.
I ain't saying a fucking thing.
So what work did you look at to help you through Schindler's? What were the kind of inspirations? What stuff did you...
I saw documentaries, I watched for the probably 20th time the entire World at War, the Laurence Olivier BBC documentary on World War II. Laurence Olivier was the brilliant narrator. And I watched that a lot. I watched just a lot of documentaries.
And did you feel psychologically you come to a point, sorry, when you come to a point you were ready to do it?
I took the writer, Steve Zalian, who had written a really nice script for me, but It was a typical 121-page draft, a very safe page count, a very provocative and honest acquitting of the Thomas Keneally book and the truth as it was told by all the witnesses that talked to Keneally. But the script was very, very economic, and it bothered me. And I said to Steve, I think what you and I need is to go to Poland together, and we need to just exist in Poland. Let's go to the death camps. Let's see where Oskar Schindler lived. Let's go to the Plaszow forced labor camp where Amon Get, murdered and survived, and we did. And we had 2 amazing airplane rides where we just talked about how to open this up. And Steve, I think, was so inspired by that trip that I didn't hear from him for weeks. And the next time I heard from him, it was to give me a 185-page draft. When I read the draft, I was working on Jurassic Park. I was at Stan Winston's, working on just looking at some of the big maquettes. And Kathy Kennedy was in the parking lot, and I was meeting her for a meeting, and my producer, and I walked out to Kathy and says, I'm doing Schindler's List, I'm doing it right now. And Kathy said, you can't do it right now, you're making Jurassic Park. You can't do Schindler's List right now. I don't care, I'll do them both at the same time. I literally meant that. And started hiring people and started casting immediately. It was just, that script was what sent me over the edge.
When you work on a movie like Schindler's List,
Yeah.
or anything, is that the master you're serving? Meaning, in terms of style or approach, like you talking about the colors, which is, such a great question. I was just wondering, like, do you feel like you are consciously figuring out the tone and the sort of visual systems of what the movie's going to be, and that's what you're going to do, or is it telling you what it's going to be, and you're sort of following it?
The script tells me what it needs from me, because if the script has no tone, I don't direct the movie. I may not even produce it. If the script has no tone, it doesn't engage me. It doesn't let me go. It doesn't grab me and strangle me with whatever it is that's so compelling. So it needs to have a tone, not a style. Script doesn't need that style. Steve's Alien has a definite style because Steve will do a narrative and then it'll quickly flash forward or flash back. He's got a great facility for, on paper, putting production value on the page. He's amazing at that. And he had the rhythms there, but the script pretty much has to speak to me and has to say, this is what I need from you to make me better than I am, but not much better. Because I don't think any of us can be that much better than the screenplays or teleplays that we work on. We just can't. We can be a little bit better, but we can't be much better. We need great writing to make us look real good.
So, you did Schindler's List. Have you got another Schindler's List in your mind?
Well, the Shoah Foundation was going to be, I kind of said to everyone after the movie that I'm not going to be making another Holocaust movie, or I won't be doing another dramatization of the Holocaust, but I'll be getting much more involved in documentary filmmaking, and so my Shoah Foundation produces a lot of documentaries every year, and that's pretty much my focus now with the stories of the survivors.
But is there any other subject other than the Holocaust which is eating away at you that you want to do?
Well, my Lincoln movie, which I'm finally making after all these years, there's another 8 years that went by like that, since I bought Doris Goodwin's book, Team of Rivals. But that's been eating away at me a lot, and I'm making that picture in October with Daniel Day-Lewis playing Abraham Lincoln.
I see that.
So what about Jurassic Park? Take us back to that, Jim. You chose that little clip.
Well, it sort of goes back almost to the Close Encounters clip. It's that sense of wonder, but it was to me, I picked that clip out of all of Jurassic Park. I remember when I watched the film, I almost had tears welling up in the moment when they see the dinosaurs for the first time, and the brachiosaur kind of rises up on its hind legs, and the behavior that you couldn't get from a fossil, and how amazing it would have been for a paleontologist to actually see living dinosaurs. But I picked the T-Rex clip because of the reveal of it, just because it was such consummate cinema, with just the little ripples in the water glass. Now, what's a water glass doing sitting on the dashboard anyway? Nobody cares.
It was.
And I know that because Stan Winston was a close friend of both of ours, what they were, going through in terms of what you could see and what you couldn't see.
Right.
And it's only at the very end of that whole sequence that you actually see the creature itself. And these days it would just come roaring out in CG right away. You know what I mean? And the fact you had to be circumspect, was working within the limitations of the time, and yet it made it such an amazing scene.
But it's also basic, suspense. I mean, Hitchcock didn't invent suspense, but he certainly made an art and a name for himself with suspense, and it's also can be called, cinematic foreplay. I mean, it really is. You just get the audience to where they either don't want to look at what you're about to reveal, or they can't wait to see it. But it can't be anywhere in between. It has to be either that or that, but it can't be anywhere in between. And a movie like Jurassic Park just gave me the opportunity to really mess around and attenuate those scenes and take my time and listen to the rain hitting the car and listen to the different sounds of rain on the roof of the car, which is a different sound than when you cut to the rain in the car that Jeff Goldblum, right, is sitting in. And it was a real great sound design, that movie. Gary Rydstrom was just an amazing sound job. But at the same time, it was all about suspense. That whole film was about suspense. Mm-hmm. And what I still haven't done, which I'm dying to do someday, is to make a real movie about suspense, like a real old-fashioned murder mystery that has you on the edge of your seat. Those are hard to do. Those are tough movies to make.
I debated which clip, because there are so many clips of the dinosaurs that were CG, and of course it was really the first film that showed living CG animals in a way that was completely compelling. And it was just one of those quantum moments in cinema, I think. It was the moment that, Stan Winston and I looked at each other and said, this whole prosthetics and hydraulics and everything, this is all going to be sunsetting, and so, I just think that for this evening, being, game changers, you've changed the game so many times, but that was one of the real quantum leaps that I think really redefined the business.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, the game is for everybody to change, and there will be many, many more changes in the very near future. I mean, there's going to be changes that we probably in this whole room collectively cannot even imagine, but it's not because the audience is demanding us to come out of a different rabbit hole each time. It's because we can't stop ourselves, from trying to figure out, what is the next way of reducing the aesthetic distance between the audience and the experience, and how do we get the audience someday actually inside the experience? How do we get there? I'd love to help us get there. I know that you're working on something like that too right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we all collectively just try to move the ball forward, and it's I think, but no one I think has done it more consistently and more consummately over time. But I just want to say one other thing is as much as I'm in awe of you as a filmmaker for how good you are, I'm just really pissed off at how prolific you are. Because you've probably a quarter of your career is more than I'd ever get to, and it's all just great stuff.
Thank you, Jim. But well, I'd love to see you direct every year. All of us would.
Yeah, but
we would love that.
But I mean, what's so amazing about you? We've seen you break ground in Close Encounters with those visual effects when you went out and met with Trumbo and all this sort of stuff. And when you did Jurassic Park, which I was told was the seminal movie in digital animals, it was the first animal. Did you know what you could achieve? Did you find out what you could achieve, or were you lucky, or are you just ballsy and just try and get stuff?
Well, I'll take a little credit for this. Here's where I was ballsy. Did I come up with the idea of shooting digital dinosaurs? No. Dennis Muren came up with the idea. I was very happy working with Phil Tippett on Go Motion, conventional Go Motion, Ray Harryhausen style animation. We had done many, many tests. We had gotten it to where it looked good enough, not great, but good enough, that the audience would actually feel that they were in danger of those dinosaurs. And Phil Tippett was a genius and was the greatest, Go Motion puppeteer and creator since Ray Harryhausen, in my opinion. It's when I got a call from Dennis Muren and said, I've been working on something, and I'd like you to take a look at this. And he came down to LA and he showed me a 3/4-inch tape of a couple of Gallimimus dinosaurs, only bones, a skeletal Gallimimus running across a still photograph of Hawaii, just a still photo of some valley in Hawaii, and this group of galleys are running, and I could not believe it because they were smooth, and it was just like watching a true life adventure story on the Nature Channel or on the documentary channel from Africa. It was like watching cheetahs or watching antelopes. It was that realistic, and yet they were just skeletal. There was they weren't fleshed out. And I saw that test, and I knew that we had entered a new era, that Dennis Muren and ILM had introduced all of us to. I take a little credit, as you have to, Jim, take credit for this, because Young Sherlock Holmes was the first movie ever to have a digital element in the film, which I produced and Barry Levinson directed. And it was a sequence where a stained glass figure of a Templar knight jumps out of the window and kills the priest. I don't know if you
that was
remember
officially the first.
That was officially the first one, and then the second time it was a character in a movie. The very second time that ever happened, I believe, was the tendril from your movie The Abyss, with Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio's face at the end of the tendril.
And you know what the common element is? Dennis Muren.
Dennis Muren.
Same thing. It was a test from Dennis Muren.
Right. Yeah. That's what got you to discover that. And the third one was T2. So you have to understand that this is an amazingly collaborative, open information medium that we're in. There is no such thing, and there should never be any such thing as trade secrets. There should be nothing like that. This should all be open. When we discover something, we should be so proud of it. We should invite everybody in to take a look at it, the way you got all of us onto the stage at Playa to watch how your movie Avatar was just starting out. And this is how we discover these things. So yeah, I'll take credit for being open-minded enough to say to Dennis Muren, okay, we're going to change the paradigm. We're going to shoot all of Jurassic Park digitally, with digital dinosaurs. And there's only 60 shots in the movie, There's only 60 digital dinosaur shots in all of Jurassic Park. There's like 350 Stan Winston puppets. So Stan Winston has the majority of credit for Jurassic Park. Yeah. But those 60 shots kind of started a whole new era.
Yeah, but the balance continuously shifted away from prosthetics and more towards CG. Yes, that's true. In the subsequent Jurassic Park films too.
Right. Because the second Jurassic Park film that I directed had 180 digital shots.
Yeah, but your point is absolutely critical. That if we're as open source as we can be, it's enlightened self-interest, because other people are going to go advance the technique, and then the next time we want to do something, solve a special problem, somebody else will have figured out how to do it. When I wrote Avatar, I didn't know how to make it, and nobody did. But I knew that other people would be figuring out all the pieces of it over time. All I had to do was wait.
Right, exactly. If I had it to do all over again, when Stanley Kubrick and I started collaborating on AI, and I'll just throw this quick AI story in. Stanley, had Dennis Muren. He called me up and he said, "Who can do a complete puppet that's realistic?" And I said, Dennis Muren. So Stanley and Dennis Muren began meeting, and Dennis began taking long trips to St. Albans, where Stanley lives, and talking to Stanley about creating an entire animatronic character that would star in Stanley's version of AI. And the state of the art wasn't quite there yet to make it convincing. And if I had it to do all over again, because I wrote the script of that one based on Stanley's 80, 90-page treatment, I would have simply had to wait another 8, 9 years, and I would have made AI today with Haley Joel Osment, let's say, still playing David, but in a performance capture suit, 100% CG. Yeah. And if that android had been CG, it would have been just unusual enough to have been more unique than the way I did it with an actor.
Yeah, exactly.
But, it's all timing.
Exactly.
But you've got the nerve to wait or go ahead with it or whatever. You must have some innate sense of when is the right time to do something, because Jurassic Park, those 60 shots might not have worked. Is that possible?
Yeah, it's possible they might not have worked, because we committed to a full digital render on Jurassic Park before we had ever fleshed the skeletons. So we changed the paradigm before any big tests had been done to put skin, flesh, marbled skin, and musculature moving under the skin for authenticity. Before we knew even that was going to work, we shifted.
When did you see the first shot where you got to relax and say, okay, this is going to work? How long into the production?
About 5 months after I finished shooting the movie. Yeah, that's how it usually works. It's usually when you're way past the point of no return. That's when it happens.
So you knew you dodged a bullet.
Yes. That's all we do.
So, I mean, I find it hard to understand your process of thought, how you can be doing Jurassic Park with all these, digital revolutions going on, and the other part of your brain is preparing Schindler's List. I mean, how do you do that? How do you separate them off? Because, I mean, you have a vast body of work.
Well, I just must be nuts because, I don't know why I even put myself, through this. I could have waited another year. I felt the timing for Schindler's List was immediate, and I didn't even react to any kind of an intellectual, or a research philosophy that the world is ready for a Holocaust story. I was ready to tell it after 9 years of waiting. That was the most important thing for me anyway, that it was my time to tell this story, whether it was anybody's time to receive the story. But at the same time, I got so far ahead of myself because I was actually prepping Schindler's List and physically shooting in principal photography on Jurassic Park. So when the poles shifted, and now I'm in Krakow making Schindler's List, and 5 days a week, I'm doing a huge teleconference with a humongous 60-foot parabolic dish in my backyard, connected to ILM, not so I could see them and they could see me, but so they could be in real time delivering the dailies, the digital dinosaurs, so we can then critique the lighting and the physical movement and make the changes. So that was the worst part of the whole movie. I didn't want to be doing Jurassic Park any longer. I was done with Jurassic Park. And I was completely underground with Schindler's List. And to have to come home every single night and watch dinosaurs was a living hell for me. It really sucked horribly. And I just didn't care. I just literally didn't care. I called George Lucas up and I said, George, I'm still shooting Schindler's List. I'm here in Poland. And will you dub my movie? Because I can't even mix Jurassic Park. So George supervised the mix. And they flew reels to Paris. And on weekends, I'd fly from Krakow to Paris, listen to a reel with the sound crew, Gary Wrightstrom. I'd make all my changes. They'd take the changes back to Skywalker Sound, and they would bring the changes back the next week and a new reel I hadn't seen yet. And so this was so intrusive, I can't tell you. And I only realized that I liked Jurassic Park again when my wife made me go to the 7 o'clock show at the AFCO Theater and see it with a real audience. And after that experience, I said, I'd like this movie again. This is a good movie. This is fun. They like it. There's nothing wrong with that. But it was tough and I've not done that. I've not done that way since.
But you sort of now are with Lincoln and Robopocalypse, and then you did Tintin and Warhorse. I mean,
at least there was some
it's unbelievable.
Because when you and I were working on Super 8, it was 30 days of mocap shooting, but then it was 2.5 years of animation after that, which I wasn't involved in except to approve, the shots.
Right.
So those didn't really overlap.
So, I mean, how do you read a lot of material? Do you get sent a lot of material? How do you choose what to do? I mean, do you have a feeling that you want to do this sort of film or that sort of film? Or is it just how the cards fall for you?
It's how the cards fall, because every time I say, I really want to do a musical, which I've been saying ad nauseum, for 25 years, I can't find one to do, I can't find a musical to make. So as I zero in on something that I really would like to do the genre of a musical, and now I'm doing one for NBC called Smash. It's a TV series. That's probably maybe as close as I get. When I really focus on something like that, it doesn't come as naturally as when I'm just open to something that lands, in my lap, and, just an idea from a newspaper that I'm reading, or a magazine article, or just something. It's just literally, for me, the movies that get me to direct as opposed to the movies that get me to want to produce, are movies that come to me in very unorthodox ways. You know, when I say an unorthodox way, for instance, my first movie, Sherlock Express, there was a newspaper in the Valley, I believe, back in the early 70s. It might have been called the Citizen News. I'm not exactly sure. It might have been the Citizen News. And I got the paper delivered to my doorstep, and I picked it up one day, and there was a story on page 2 about a couple who had kidnapped their son from child welfare, and the Texas Highway Patrol, the Department of Public Safety, had gone after them with like 80 police cars, and finally cornered this couple, and they gunned down the guy and killed the guy, kind of like, and it was called Modern Day Bonnie and Clyde. That was the headline. And I read that piece of paper, that became my first movie. I just instantly, on my doorstep, found my first feature. So it happens in, you know, weird ways.
Yeah, and I mean, you've always managed to get stuff financed. I mean, you tell the story of doing Jaws and then the disastrous day when you couldn't shoot anything with Robert Shaw. Was that nerve-wracking for you with a studio all over you? This was your first big movie. Have you found a way of dealing with studios? I mean, I know you own a studio, so that helps.
Not then.
That's the way.
But I mean, have you managed to have good relations with studios?
Yeah, I have. All my career, I've had great relationships starting with the guy that discovered me, Sid Sheinberg, and then Lou Wasserman, you know, and they were, you know, Lou was, 4.5 decades at MCA Universal, and Sid 34 years there. And Terry Semel and Bob Daly and Steve Ross at Warner Brothers, you know, I would just hop back and forth right across Barham Boulevard from Universal to Warner's. That was a great 20 years of my life when those were my main go-to places. And I've always had a good relationship with the studios, but you know, it's not really a problem, but part of the situation is that I wanted to start my own company because I wanted to mentor, because mentoring to me is the most satisfying thing I think I can do. I think any of us can do, is when we're mentors. And it's harder to mentor when you've got to go ask your Uncle Sid for money to give to Bob Zemeckis to make I Want to Hold Your Hand. He did it. He said yes. But it's harder to go out and sell than it is when you've got your own studio and you can just find a director. Like I found Sam Mendes from the West End and offered him, you know, American Beauty before he directed a film.
Well, having been on the receiving end of your mentoring, I'm incredibly grateful for that.
But JJ was interesting because I didn't mentor JJ that way. He mentored me. He really helped me with my 8mm films. We never met until 6 years later.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
But the thing that I'll say about JJ is when Tom Cruise hired him to do Mission Impossible, Tom and JJ sent me the print before I think anybody but the studio had seen it. I think Paramount had seen it, no one else had seen it. And I got that print back, and this is his first feature film, and I looked at that movie, and I looked at that picture and I said, that's not his first movie. Are they nuts? That's a first movie? I mean, it was really intimidating to watch that picture for the first time. That was a pretty
you're
great
a
movie.
liar.
No, I'm not. That was pretty amazing.
Oh, you're sweet.
Pretty amazing.
Thank you.
I mean, I'm going to ask you two guys, so I'm going to give you the minute to think about it. What, in a sentence or two, is Stephen's great game-changing contribution to your careers? But to Stephen, what were the great game changers that affected you, the great artists or the great films that really, you know, blew your head off and got
Well,
you?
there were several of which were made by the same filmmaker, David Lean. So I think between The Bridge on the River Kwai and I have to say Lawrence Arabia certainly, which I think is the best screenplay written for a movie, and then Great Expectations. I mean, 3 for me game changers from one filmmaker. But the biggest game changer that changed my life completely was Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, which I saw when I was in college at Long Beach State. And I'm still living off of the adrenaline that in '68 I experienced at the Pantages Theater watching that film for the first time, and then the next week for the second time, and the next week for the third time. That was a game changer.
Exactly. Same reaction, exactly. Had to go back and see it. There's no DVDs then. You know,
Right. No, you had to go back and see the movie.
The only other time it happened was with a Lean film, which was Dr. Zhivago. Just went back and saw it 3 nights in a row, and that's a 3.5-hour movie.
Right.
But you know, when I saw your stuff, you know, those were the types of movies I wanted to make. I wasn't a filmmaker yet. I mean, I was at some level, because I think we all are from a much earlier age.
I tried to get you started, you know.
When?
I offered you Amazing Stories.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
I recognize talent.
No, we met. That's right, we met, and I was just about to go do Aliens, or I was writing Aliens, I think. And we were talking about Amazing Stories, and you said, "Oh, I know what to do. I know what to do. Because the first Alien, the alien was bad. Have the alien be misunderstood, and the humans are trying to kill it, and it's running around the ship." You know, and
Thank goodness you didn't do that.
no, but I just, you know, it's just, you know, I love that, you know, just sort of creative process, watching it in action, and that's why I knew I wasn't doing Amazing Stories. 'Cause there's no way I wanted to be that close to that bright a light at that point. You know, I was still trying to get my candle lit. You know.
And what was it about Lean that was such a game changer for you?
Just that he was like a cinematic novelist. You know, it was just, you know, his imagery was like reading 15 pages of prose and good prose, and you know, he would tell a story inside a frame, and you knew that when Omar Sharif was talking to his guide, I mean, when Peter O'Toole was talking to his guide on the way to meet Faisal for the first time, King Faisal, and they're sitting out there in the middle of the desert. By the way, day for night, the best day for night in history has only been done by Freddie Young and David Lean. Both Dr. Zhivago and Lawrence of Arabia. But Lean did a couple of brilliant things. A couple in like one scene, I'm saying a couple in one scene, a couple of brilliant things. He put them in a wide shot, and they were sitting there talking with each other, and it was just desert. There's nothing there. He even had the camels off camera, but he put a kind of tumbleweed, or this very thin bush, a very wiry, almost mossy bush, in the shot. And the bush, for some reason, for me anyway, in that scene, was the win for that one frame, which he held on for a long time, was putting that bush there. It represented a lot of things to me. I won't go into a bunch of bullshit about that, but it represented a lot. And then the other moment that we all remember, with when Omar Sharif shows up, and we see that amazing mirage where he's floating, just liquid, floating in the liquid of the sky, just above the horizon. Lean very brilliantly had a path cut into the desert, and it was a path that is justified because there's a well, and you have to take a path to get to the well. But he used that path to guide our eyes to the mirage, and that path split the frame right down the middle, with the guides on the left, I believe, and guide on the right and O'Toole on the left. So David's compositions and his framing told stories. One frame would tell a huge story, and I've learned so much from him.
Did you talk to him about it?
All of us have.
Did you talk to him?
I did. I talked to him a lot because we got to know each other for about 4 or 5 years before he died, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, was he as conscious of what he was doing as you were?
More conscious than I am about what I do, really. He was really conscious about all that stuff. Nothing in his frames was by accident, nothing.
But you're so reverential to the classics and to the aesthetics of movies, and you know all the references, and at the same time you just pick up the camera and get in there and operate yourself. So you're not like an academic about it. You like to get your hands on the process of making movies. Are you still cutting on film?
I'm still cutting on film, but my first movie that I didn't cut on film was War Horse. And I didn't cut that on film for a number of reasons. I was kind of curious also to see what it would be like to cut a film on the Apted, which I had never done. Everything up before War Horse has all been cut on the Kim and the Moviola. I mean, if you came into our cutting room, it's like a museum. It really is. You'd walk over there and you'd see these relics just existing in real time. But it was a good experience. What I don't like about the Apted is I don't have time to take a walk. I don't have time. I have to take forced walks to think because it's just too fast. Mm-hmm. You just literally ask for something and it's done for you right while you wait. And I really like being able to give my editor a bunch of changes and then get up and take a walk for half an hour while he's physically cutting and taping or clipping, and then the assistants tape. And then I can come back in half an hour and he says, "I'm not done yet. Take 15 more minutes." I go out and I walk for 15 more minutes. I come back and my anticipation is building. I'm thinking about my movie. I'm thinking about, oh, maybe I shouldn't have told him to make that cut. Every decision it takes man hours to achieve. And that meant that there's a craft, there's a physical craft when you're actually, cutting your fingers, bleeding, literally bleeding with that butt splicer. And I miss that. That's the one thing I do miss is that kind of, is bleeding is what I miss, the most. But that kind of, that time out to think about your movie and take walks around the lot. And I don't do that anymore. On War Horse, it was just, you just make instant decisions.
And Lincoln, is that going to be film? Or?
Lincoln's going to also, we're talking about that being back on film again. Right. We're talking about that, yeah. Haven't decided 100%. Mm-hmm.
Now, what about digital cameras? I'm
not ready for digital cameras, Jim. I'm sorry. Not yet. Not yet. Not as a director. Not as a director. A lot of
how good you could be.
Oh. Yes, that should read on an ad for the red camera. Think how good you could be. Red camera.
Well, one of the other interesting things about you is you use the same people a huge amount. Michael's cut most of your movies, hasn't he?
He's cut everything from Close Encounters.
And Janusz now does all the movies. Why do you do that? Is it a comfort zone?
Yeah.
Or?
Well, it's because when you find somebody who's the best, you don't want to go and find the second best. So I've got the best. I've got Mike Hahn's the best editor I can imagine ever working with. Janusz Kaminski, for me, is the best cinematographer I've ever worked with. I go back and forth. I've used Rick Carter as a production designer on more movies than anyone else. I've used other production designers when Rick's not been available. But I tend to, Johnny Williams has scored everything that I've ever directed except The Color Purple. And there's a shorthand, obviously. There's a complete shorthand when we've worked together this long. Mm-hmm. And there's a real feeling that I leave home in the morning and I say goodbye to my wife, and I take my kids to school, as I know JJ does every day, and I go into the office, and I go back to my family. So it's from family to family. There's nothing greater than walking into a room with Christy and Sam and just my group. It's home. It's coming home after leaving home.
But do you think using the same pool, does it stop change, development? I mean, do you not feel sometimes a need for new voices in the ear, or not?
No, the voices that I've had in my ear have done a pretty good job for me.
Really?
So I don't want to change that. And I also listen, and I think that's the other thing that I've always said to young filmmakers. They say, "Oh, we listened to your last piece of advice. We went out and bought, some really good, Adidas shoes to have comfortable shoes on the set." And I said, "Well, I was being glib. I wasn't being serious." The real serious advice is you got to listen. You've got to listen. None of us have all the answers. None of us have even half the answers. And if you find yourself in a really good room with really smart, creative people who all become, not threats to you, they just become, they become extensions of your vision of whatever you're working on, and they can help you tell a really good story. And I've just have always opened it up for anybody's ideas. If they're good enough, they go in the movie. I remember the day that on Raiders of the Lost Ark, my AD in the morning came over to me, David Tomlin, and I love working in England because they get to call you Gov. They call the Gov, which is great. You know that. It's great. It's great to be called Gov when you're in the UK working. They don't call you Gov here. They call you a lot of things. They don't call you Gov. But he came over to me and said, "Gov, you know that girl in the first row, the real pretty girl in the first row? They were all pretty, but he pointed one girl out, and I said, yeah." He said, "Well, when Indiana Jones is up being the school teacher and he's teaching everybody about, these burrows, why don't you have her write on her eyelids, 'Love you'?" And then what she does is she smiles and she closes her eyes, and Indy sees it says 'Love you', one on each eye, and she flirts with him with the writing. And that's one of my favorite moments in all of the first Raiders of the Lost Ark, and that came from my AD. If David had come to me, if I were somebody else, he came to me and said, "Oh, that's a silly idea." Some of saying it's a silly idea to a great idea is because you don't want to share credit. You don't want to give anybody else the credit for it.
But you have to create that culture on your own.
You have to create that culture on your own set. You have to make people not afraid to come over and offer up an idea.
Yeah.
And you got to start with your actors, and then you got to have your crew do the same thing.
So JJ and Jim, what is the one thing that Stephen has changed, do you think, in your work or your perception? of your work?
I would say that the influence before I recut Firelight and the influence that I've experienced, that I've had ever since I saw Jaws, the first movie of yours I saw. The thing that has just struck me is the humanity of your films. I mean, you've dealt with terrifying, otherworldly, supernatural, crazy stories, but you've always managed to tell them in a way that I felt in such good hands and safe. And it's just an amazing thing that there was a sense of, the first thing I thought of when you asked the question before was that you sort of taught me long before we met, and certainly since then, just that anything's possible. That this sense of unlimited possibility, and it is. I mean, people have. You're known, as you were saying earlier, for having a sort of childlike sensibility. But I think when you say childlike, it's not about immaturity at all. It's about the sense of looking at the world as if anything's possible. Right. And that, to me, is literally the most priceless thing. And the older you get, the harder it is to hold on to. But your films were a physical, tangible manifestation of potential, of possibility, and that, to me, was the thing that filled me up.
Very nice.
So what I just learned is that in a situation like this, go first. Well, it's interesting. We talked about the effect that 2001 had on us, and I was stuck in that mode. I was stuck in my head, kind of intellectually and visually, and I wasn't thinking about telling stories about people. And then I saw you do what you do, whether it was Close Encounters, Jaws, whatever that those films were in the 70s, and they were films that had the spectacle, had the craft, had what I loved about Lean, but they were human stories. They were told through people. They were stories about people, the quirks of people, observant about how people think, what's funny, and all of those things. So for me, as a nascent filmmaker, starting Terminator, which was my first film, it was how do I tell this fantastic, almost absurd story, if you think about it, in human terms. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the strength of that movie, is the people are real, they're quirky, the two roommate girls, that, and you can go on a journey anywhere to the ends of the universe, to any fantastic place. If you care about the people, you'll go with them, and that's what I learned. So for me, the evolution was sort of from Kubrick to Spielberg, if you will. It was the humanization of that imaginative process, and I'm not sure I would have gotten there if there wasn't an example that inspired me as much as your films inspired me.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, Jim. Thank you.
So let me ask you just a couple of things. I mean, I know your career is going on and on and on. Is there anything up to now that you regret?
Yeah, a couple things, I think. I think my biggest regret, is having to leave Rain Man, which was a film that I developed with Dustin and Tom and Ron Bass, the writer. And I bailed on the movie for a personal reason, which we don't have to go into. But that was one of my biggest regrets, was bailing on that after working on it for 6 months and researching it and spending a lot of time with Dustin, and not so much with Tom, but more with Dustin. And that was a movie that really touched me. I thought that was completely in my wheelhouse, and I understood it. But here's the thing that I was able to acknowledge once I saw it. I couldn't have made it the way Barry Levinson made that film, and I would have... Barry gave it a documentary edge. He gave it a very, very realistic, unpredictable energy. And I would have told the story, because I was on my way to telling the story this way, a little more slick. I was going for more of a slick approach. The lighting would have been a little more slick. Barry went for lighting that looked more like it was actually happening, like there was a documentary camera that was being handheld and came into the room when the bath water was so hot. And Barry turned out, it was a real epiphany to see a movie that I worked on so hard, and then see it a year later that somebody else, in someone else's hands, to realize how much a director informs a screenplay, how much different one director can be from the next. When Woody Allen invited me to join him and Marty Scorsese in doing these New York stories, and I flew to New York and met with Marty and Woody, this is a number of years ago, and Woody said, well, you'll go out, Stephen, and find some short 30-minute film. Marty, you'll go find a 30-minute, we'll do it in our own styles, and then all different stories, and we'll come back and we'll meet at the premiere. How's that? We won't have to talk to each other. We'll just see each other at the premiere. And I stopped and I said, hey, Woody, why don't we do this? Why don't we all use the same script? Well, somebody writes a script, you do your version of the same script, I'll do my version, Marty does his version. I'll bet there'll be 3 completely different movies. And Woody just looked at me. So I didn't do it. I don't know who did it, but I decided not to do it. But that really was interesting when I saw Rain Man. I saw that what Barry Levinson had brought to that would have achieved a kind of success that I wouldn't have achieved with my intentions for Rain Man. So it was Beshert fate that I wound up not making it and Barry did.
Did that influence the way in which you approached Munich, where you made sort of some of the same decisions, not to be so slick?
Yes, it did, very much so. But I was really inspired. I was inspired to make Munich by Billy Friedkin's The French Connection. I must have watched The French Connection 3-4 times, watched how he used the zoom lens on that. I have never zoomed as much as I zoomed on Munich. I was zooming in, zooming out, moving the camera, zooming in, zooming out. It was a real clusterfuck, you know?
So just last one, what are you most proud of?
Pardon?
What are you most proud of?
In my work or in my life?
Either.
My kids, my marriage. You know, that's way up here. In my work, I think, you know, the film that I'm most proud of as a movie that got some work done in the world was Schindler's List. So that's what I'm most proud of in terms of a work. And the film that came closest to matching my vision of a movie, and the only film that's come that close to matching my vision of a movie, was Close Encounters. And E.T. I love because it inspired me to have children.
All right, well, thank you all very much. That's great.
Thank you. All of you. Thank you guys.